It was supposed to be a day of celebration, a day to honor years of hard work, dedication, and triumph over adversity. But for Maria Sanchez, it became something far more, a day that would reveal the quiet power of family, loyalty, and Maria was a soft-spoken woman in her late 50s, widowed young and a single mother. She had worked 2 jobs most of her life, a housekeeper in the mornings and a night shift cashier at the local grocery store. Her pride and joy was her only son, Daniel Sanchez, a determined young man who had just earned a full scholarship and was now graduating from a prestigious military prep academy. Maria had sacrificed everything so Daniel could succeed. Never missed a parent-teacher conference, never failed to drop off a lunch when he forgot, and always reminded him of who he was and where he came from. When graduation day arrived, Maria wore her best, a modest floral dress and a shawl she'd crocheted herself. She didn't care that others around her wore designer suits or expensive dresses. She wasn't there to impress anyone. She was there to watch her son walk across that stage. But before the ceremony could begin, 2 security guards approached her. "Ma'am, this section is for reserved guests," one said, looking her up and down. Maria glanced at the sign. "It didn't say that when I sat down," she replied quietly. "We've had complaints. We're going to have to ask you to leave this row." The second one added more firmly. Maria was confused, then embarrassed. She stood to move, clutching the homemade shawl tighter around her shoulders. Other parents nearby looked away, some in pity, some in silence, a few with smug satisfaction. But as Maria stepped aside, trying to hold her tears back, something happened that would change the entire atmosphere of that gymnasium. The heavy side door creaked open, and in walked 6 men. Not just any men, 6 Navy SEALs in full-dress uniform. The room fell silent. The air changed. Leading them was Petty Officer Marcus Steele, a tall, imposing figure with ribbons that told stories few could ever imagine. He walked straight to Maria. "Mrs. Sanchez," said with a warm smile, "we're here for you." The guards froze. Maria, stunned, looked around. "Me? Yes, ma'am. You raised one hell of a man. He served beside us, trained with us, and now he's one of us." Confused whispers began echoing in the crowd. "What were Navy SEALs doing here?" Marcus continued. "Daniel's not just graduating. He's being honored as top of his class. He saved one of us during a training op last year. And before we let him wear that trident, we made a promise that if his mama ever needed anything, we'd be there." He turned to the stunned security guards. "And right now, she needs her seat back." Neither guard spoke. They just backed away, sheepishly. Stepping aside, the SEALs escorted Maria back to her seat, no longer alone, but flanked by 6 of the most elite warriors in the world. And when Daniel's name was called during the ceremony, he stood tall. But before he stepped forward, he looked toward the crowd, toward his mother, and saluted. Maria didn't just witness her son's graduation. She witnessed the brotherhood he had become a part of. A brotherhood that had her back, just as she'd always had Daniel's. The crowd rose to its feet, not just for Daniel, but for Maria, the woman whose quiet strength had raised a hero. And in that moment, she wasn't just a simple woman in a homemade dress. She was the mother of a warrior. Everyone knew it, asterisk. As Daniel stepped forward to receive his diploma, the entire gymnasium erupted into a standing ovation. It's not just polite clapping, but raw, emotional applause that filled every corner of the hall. Students cheered, faculty paused with tearful smiles, and even some of the parents who had looked down on Maria earlier were now applauding her with admiration. Daniel walked up the steps of the stage with the bearing of someone far older than his years. His face was calm, but his eyes shined with emotion. When the headmaster handed him the diploma and congratulated him, he didn't smile for the cameras. He didn't turn toward the audience, turned back toward his mother, still holding the diploma. Daniel raised it high in the air and pointed to Maria. "That's for her," he said, his voice echoing into the microphone unintentionally. The crowd paused for a moment, then the applause returned louder this time, back at her seat.
Ow.
Maria couldn't hold back her tears anymore. But this time, they weren't tears of shame or confusion, or tears of pride. As the ceremony ended and students poured out to greet their families, many approached Daniel not just to shake his hand, but to shake hers, one of the academies. Top instructors came over and said, "Mrs. Sanchez, your son is one of the most disciplined, focused cadets I've ever seen. Now I understand why. You raised a leader." Maria, still overwhelmed, smiled and nodded. "I just raised my boy the only way I knew how." But the surprises weren't over. As people filtered out of the auditorium, Petty Officer Marcus Steele returned, this time holding a small wooden box. "Daniel told us what this day meant to you, so we got together and had something made." He opened the box. Inside was a challenge coin, not just any coin, but one custom engraved with the Navy SEAL trident on one side and the words, "To the mother who built a warrior's strength, loyalty, honor, begin at home." Maria gasped softly as Marcus placed the coin in her hand. "You didn't just raise a SEAL," he said. "You raised 6. Because every one of us carries what Daniel carries, and that started with you." It was a gesture few civilians ever experienced, a deep symbol of respect that even seasoned military personnel regarded with reverence. Maria stood there, humbled beyond words. In her world of long shifts, scraped-together rent, and quiet prayers, at night she had never expected this kind of recognition. She didn't want it. She deserved it. That night, after the celebration wound down and the crowd dispersed, Maria sat quietly in her small apartment, her shawl still draped around her shoulders and the challenge coin resting in her palm. Daniel sat next to her, no longer in his uniform, just her boy again. "Did you ever think it would turn out like this?" he asked softly. She looked at him with that same gentle strength she had always carried. "No, I just hoped you'd be okay, and that maybe someday you'd be proud of me too." Daniel reached over, wrapped his arms around her, and whispered, "I've always been proud of you, Mama. Always." And in that quiet moment, away from the medals and speeches and uniforms that was the real ceremony asterisk later that week, Maria returned to her routine, early morning housekeeping, walking, 2 buses to the hotel on the edge of town, then home in the evenings to cook simple meals. Life hadn't changed in most people's eyes, but something deep inside her had shifted. People at the hotel whispered, now not about how plain she dressed or how quiet she was, but about that graduation. Word had gotten around. The front desk manager even offered to move her to lighter duties, and the cook in the back started saving her hot meals. She didn't ask for favors. But people were treating her differently now, with a quiet respect, and it wasn't just the town that had taken notice. A few days after the graduation, Maria received a letter in the mail. The envelope bore the seal of the United States Navy. Inside was a handwritten note from Admiral Thomas Weller, commander of Naval Special Warfare Command. "Dear Mrs. Sanchez, it has come to my attention the extraordinary woman you are and the remarkable young man you have raised. Your son's reputation for discipline, leadership, and courage is a reflection of the values instilled in him at home. On behalf of the Navy, I want to thank you for your sacrifice and dedication. Parents like you are the silent foundation upon which our most elite forces stand. We salute you." With deep respect, Admiral Weller Maria folded the letter carefully and placed it inside her Bible. She didn't tell many people about it, not because she didn't treasure it, but because to her, the real prize had already come, seeing her son live a life she never dared to dream for herself. Then came another surprise. Daniel called her one evening and said he was flying home for the weekend, not alone, but with someone special. When she opened the front door 2 days later, there stood Daniel. And beside him, Petty Officer Marcus Steele and one of the other SEALs, Fro**, graduation. "Mama," Daniel said with a grin, "they wanted to come meet you proper." Maria didn't hesitate. She opened the door wide and ushered them in like family. The small apartment quickly filled with laughter, conversation, and the smell of homemade tamales. Marcus looked around at the tiny living room, the old recliner patched with duct tape, the family photos hung with care. "This," he said, "this is what makes warriors, not gear, not training. Heart." Before they left that evening, Marcus stood and said, "We wanted to offer something, not just to say thank you, but to honor what you represent. We've pooled together with a few others, and we'd like to help move you into a new place. Maria's eyes widened. No, no, I can't accept that. It's not charity, ma'am, he said, smiling. It's repayment. For every night you stayed awake worrying. For every meal you skipped so Daniel could eat better. For the strength you passed on to him and through him to us. With her hands trembling slightly, Maria finally nodded. Only if I can cook for you all once a month. Everyone laughed, but she was serious. Weeks later, Maria moved into a small but beautiful home closer to Daniel's base. Not fancy, but full of light and peace, and for the first time in decades, she didn't hear the